lust, adultery, pornography. We live in a society that's saturated with immodesty, with the idea of the less you wear, the better you look. And yet it's interesting that when you think about the idea of lust and adultery, where it begins in the mind. And so because of that, there's some things that we need to caution ourselves against so we can be better individuals and also so that we can hopefully be pleasing to God. If you'd like to learn more about this idea of lust, stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're watching Timeless Talks, timeless subjects, information for life.
You know, you hear the common vernacular when it comes to relationships of it's okay to look but not touch, or you know, you can look all you want, but you better, you know, you can get hungry there, but you gotta go home for dinner. Those lines, because it's this idea of the world is saturated with sexual imagery, you know, as you talked about, immodesty. You know, there's this, I mean, we use it to sell advertising. It's just everywhere. But that thought is, as long as you're not going all the way, then you've held to the standard. And as we're looking at Matthew and Jesus, in Matthew of Jesus's Sermon on the Mount here, he does a section where he basically says, "You've heard it said, but I tell you." And he talks about how our righteousness has to be higher than the Pharisees, who were the righteous people of their day. And it's interesting because he comes to the idea of adultery, and he really spins that common logic on its head.
Absolutely. In fact, he talks about how you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. And that was true. The law of Moses said, do not commit adultery. But Jesus goes further when he says, it's not really just the act. It's actually when you begin to think about it, when you desire it. In fact, he says in verse 28, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery in her heart. The heart is not the blood pump. We got to keep in mind that it is the mind. It's the emotional, the intellectual side of us. And our society gears us towards that in many different avenues. You turn on the TV, you watch commercials that have things in there that are prone to lead us in that direction.
Yeah. And I think we have fallen into the trap of, because our society has become so promiscuous, that even adultery is almost accepted. You know, it's the whole thing of, you know, we have famous people and they're committing adultery, and they'll run stories about, oh, they fell in love with the set, and they won't bring up that, you know, they were already married to somebody. But we treat it as this grand love story because we kind of say, well, that's okay. But when it comes to our own personal lives, we say, well, you really shouldn't cheat on somebody. And that's kind of where we stop. But the problem with that is it never can go to that level if it doesn't start in the heart. And I think that's what Jesus is saying here about that look of it. Now, the problem when we read this is the first thought I'm sure every guy for sure has, and a lot of women have too, is, well, you know, you can't, you see somebody and you look at them, and what does that mean? I'm just a complete adulterer because I noticed that girl looked nice or something. What is Jesus meaning here? What's the depth he's talking about here?
Well, keep in mind, this is more than just a casual look or admiration of someone. It's not looking at someone and seeing the beauty that they might have. It's actually the idea of lust here is the concept of expressing itself to the point of where one desires to have that person in a very physical way. And so when it comes down to the looking at someone that is beautiful or something along those lines, it's not what Jesus has in mind. Because obviously God created us to be of a certain nature. He created us to be able to see beauty in things. And so the idea that Jesus, though, is stressing is whenever it actually gets into our heart to the point that we want to indulge and be satisfied by our actual going to the point of indulging in that activity.
You know, it makes me remember that years ago when the Supreme Court was asked to define pornography, and they were having a hard time with it, and basically the line was, you know it when you see it. And I think that is even, you know, when we think about beauty and art and things, you can look at something and see it as the beauty that's in it. But it's when you take it to that lower component, you know, that lust develops in your heart. You know, you even think about James talking about that, you know, sin gives birth to lust. There's a switch that clicks there. And I think we need to recognize that, because the more we get into those things, the less we begin to notice the change in it. Like we can sit there and say, I'm looking, that look is a little too long. And in our world today, because it's so oversaturated, I think of what used to be on television for an acceptable amount of, what censors would say was obscene. We would maybe laugh at and go, oh, they're being a little bit. Well, now there is no barrier. You have in mainstream TV, what would be considered full nudity over broadcast standards, and it's gotten to that point. But it's because we've desensitized ourselves. And I think even that's what Jesus is talking about here, is knowing that once that lust is in your heart, you're already there. You may say, well, I haven't done anything, but you're already there.
Yes. And it boils back down to what you were saying. It's the idea of that look that's a little too long. It begins to gaze upon. And then also it expresses the will and the purpose, the decision and intention to actually act, just lacking the opportunity. And so we really know when it becomes too long. You see someone, if you want to put it this way, you see someone on TV or someone walk by, and you realize when your gaze becomes too long, because you realize that you're no longer looking at that for beauty. You're beginning to allow lust enter your heart. And in fact, Jesus is going to go to or speak of some extreme measures in the next couple of verses that actually points to the idea of the extent that we should go to so that we don't cross that line.
Yeah, and when we read those passages, it's like you say, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. And we'll real quickly say, well, that's it's a metaphor. You wouldn't do that. It's not your eye causing you to sin. It's not your hand causing you to sin. But Jesus uses that extreme example because I think we are way too quick to back off of it. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. Right now, if you said, the internet on my phone, the internet in my house is bringing in, it's causing me to sin because, when I click on it, it's too easy to access stuff. And you say, well, get rid of it. And people say, well, I couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. We got to use that for our TV, We said we can't do that. It's too much a part of us. Mm-hmm. Well, so is your hand, so is your eye. That's what Jesus is saying. He said, if it's causing you to sin, get rid of it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's hard for us to do. I mean, because it's become so much of a part of our life. And I think that's in our world has become so integrated. You look at people today, their phones. I mean, we have them on us all the time. We're on them all the time, and they are designed to use whatever means to keep us watching them, and a lot of that is lustful content. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we have to sit there and say, there's a point where I have to say, I can't have this. I don't need to have it in my, parents, you don't have to let your kids have their phones in the rooms at night. Parents, walk in the house and leave your phone at the front and don't touch it, because you are connected. It's causing you to sin, and we've got to consider extreme measures to deal with it.
Absolutely. And in fact, many times things can be innocent. You do a Google search for something, or go on Facebook with the TikTok Reels, and you might be watching a fishing video, and the next one is all of a sudden it's almost a naked person. And
not even almost. I mean,
sometimes
that's the scary part.
And that's the sad thing about it, is that we are enamored with these things, that we are bombarded with those things. And so these are things that we need to keep in mind. And as Barry was speaking about the extent of what Jesus talks about, we could just as well say if your phone caused you to sin, get rid of it. If your TV caused you to sin, get rid of it. And we think, well, I couldn't do that. But we need to if we want to go to heaven.
And that's exactly what Jesus' point is here. He goes, you'd rather not have that thing and then spend eternity in heaven than have that thing and spend eternity in hell. And we don't equate that, and we need to. We need to realize that the most important thing that we will do on this earth is determine our eternal destiny. And no matter how good or fun or entertaining something is, it's not worth going to hell over.
Absolutely. And if it requires us to get rid of those things, then that's absolutely what we should be willing to do, regardless of the circumstances, if that is our desire. It's a change of mind, which will result in a change of action. Thank you for listening. There's a phone number on the bottom of the screen if you'd like to contact us about this topic, the topic of lust. If you'd like more information about it, like to discuss it further, There's other resources on Timeless Talks that you'll be able to utilize that will be available to you, so you can learn more about this topic or many other topics. So feel free to check out those things. You can also use the contact page to contact us, and also the prayer request page. And so be sure to do those things so that you have the opportunity that we can help you as much as we possibly can. We'd like to thank you for listening and hope you have a wonderful day. God bless.